All right. We got a good one. We got a good one here. How many people here first came to Detroit for an under 30 summit of some kind? Raise your hands. All right. Well,
welcome to Detroit.
Welcome to Detroit. You have this guy to thank. When we were looking for a home, Steve said you got to look at Detroit and made the introduction to Dan Gilbert, and here we are. So it's about 10,000 people, way over 10,000 people have come to Detroit because of that initiative. So thank you.
Well, thank you for being here. Thank you for taking this conference to one of these rising cities. And something about Detroit is interesting. This morning I was walking around and was reminded by this. When I came here about a decade ago, I was staying at the Weston Book Cadillac. Some of you may be there. And I left the hotel to go for a run, and the guy in front, I guess the doorman, said, "Don't run that way. That's not safe," which is really quite striking. And today I deliberately went back there, and of course, the whole city has been revitalized.
And now you get a latte. So.
And it's because of partly the leadership of Dan Gilbert and the mayor and Kresge Foundation and others, but mostly because of the entrepreneurs who decided to start and scale their companies here. We backed Chinola, we backed StockX. It's been amazing to watch this journey over the last decade. A city that was really struggling is now showing great momentum. We're trying to do that now all across the country.
Well, again, you're such a good role model. If we'd had a 30 under 30 list back in the day, you certainly would have been on it.
I don't think I qualify now. Is that what you're saying?
But Steve, of course, for everyone here knows founded AOL, brought basically America to the world of email and instant messaging, and then as a venture capitalist, you've funded so many 30 under 30 companies, whether it's DraftKings or Sweetgreen or StockX, which we saw here. And in doing so, and I've seen, Steve basically decided to look at where everybody else wasn't and go there. And if you've never seen the Steve Case Riders of the Rest bus, it's basically, it's like venture capital meets like a road trip here. But it's tell us how does a boy from Hawaii get into the middle of America, venture capital barnstorming business?
Well, it was a circuitous journey, but we started AOL in the Washington, D.C. area, Northern Virginia, 37 years ago, when only 3% of people were online, and those 3% were online 1 hour a week. So we've come a long way. And it was really hard to start there. There was no venture capital there. People didn't really understand startups there. It was hard to get people to take us seriously, hard to get people to leave big companies to work for our little company. And for a decade, it was a struggle, and a couple times we almost didn't make it, and then finally we broke out. And then about a decade ago, I was asked to work on something with the White House called Startup America. And I was shocked by some of this data, that 75% of venture capital goes to 3 states, California, New York, and Massachusetts. And I think some of that, my own experience starting in a place that was kind of viewed as off the beaten path for startups and tech, and then seeing that data, so we got to do something about it. And that's why we launched the bus tour. The first one was in Detroit 8 years ago, and we've now done dozens of cities, and now through our Rides to Rest Fund have invested in 200 entrepreneurs in 100 different cities. And it's remarkable what's happening, really remarkable, but most people don't know it. In fact, a show of hands here, how many people are from Silicon Valley, currently live in Silicon Valley? A few. How many from New York City? A little bit more. How many from Boston? How many from someplace else? All right, so overwhelming.
The rest.
The rest is rising right here in Detroit at the Under 30 Summit. And you know this because you've chosen to start your companies, and not all of your entrepreneurs, but most of your entrepreneurs, start your companies in places that feel a little bit more challenging. Probably sometimes you think, well, maybe I should be in Silicon Valley because that's where the venture capital is and so forth. But we need to back entrepreneurs everywhere if we're going to disrupt some of the big industries that need to be reimagined. And we need to back entrepreneurs everywhere if we're going to create jobs everywhere and hope everywhere and opportunity everywhere. Otherwise, this divide we have in this country is going to get even greater. So that's why I've been doing it for decades. That's why, by the way, I'm going to sign this book for you, Randall.
I like this.
We're doing a book signing later
this.
Upstairs, and there were 100 copies. Now there's 99 because I stole one here for Randall. You deserve a book, Randall, for helping support our efforts.
I'll take it. And by the way, this book last week, and it's already number 25 on the Amazon list around the country. So congrats, best-selling author. It's not enough that he's a founder and a venture capitalist. Now he's a best-selling author.
But it's not my book, and I'm serious about this. It really is your book. It's a story. We're just telling the stories of the people and places we've met on the road, to hopefully inspire others to start companies, others to invest in companies, others to support entrepreneurs.
Quick and
yeah, I'll put it back here.
Yes,
So
Steve is signing 100. By the way, if you want to meet
prompt.
Steve, he's signing 100 of these right after this session, so you'll get a chance to meet Steve and get one yourself. But I appreciate that. Tell us, and I did. You know, I was reading the book. Great book, very well written. My job is, I'm jealous. Innovation hubs. The idea. Tell us about that. And that idea of how public and private work together to create these new innovation hubs.
Well, first of all, start going back to the Detroit story. It is worth remembering that 100 years ago, in Silicon Valley, they were not growing startups. They were growing fruit. Silicon Valley was basically agriculture country. 100 years ago, when Silicon Valley was growing fruit, the most innovative city in the country was Detroit. Everybody wanted to be part of the car revolution. So people moving to Detroit, I want to be part, and it was rocking and rolling, and it was super exciting, and magnet for talent and so forth. And then over a 50-year period, lost 60% of its population. And the year before we rolled in with our Rise the Rest bus, 8 years ago, the city of Detroit went bankrupt. That should give you a sense of these things kind of rise and fall. The early days of the internet, AOL I mentioned was in Northern Virginia. Some companies like Sprint were in Kansas City. IBM's PC operation for Boca Raton, Florida. An online service called CompuServe was in Columbus. Hayes, a modem company, was in Atlanta. Microsoft actually started in Albuquerque before moving to Seattle. There was more distributed. It's only the last 20 years or so when Silicon Valley has risen to this prominence, even dominance. And my view is in this next phase, what I've called the internet third wave, it creates an opportunity for other cities to rise again, in part because the expertise you need in this third wave, in healthcare, in food and ag, things like that, exists in these different parts of the country. And there's some cost of living, there's some family reasons, there's some other reasons, but strategically there are some advantages. I'll give you a couple of quick examples. One in Chattanooga.
You talk in the book about the idea that it's not enough just to be technology anymore, that technology is now jumping to specific industries.
Every company has to be, kind of tech-enabled, and sort of the fact that there's even thinking of it, the tech sector feels sort of like
no such thing.
Kind of odd way to think about it. Every company, every industry, obviously needs to be reimagined, and tech is part of it. New business models, there are different ways to approach it. But this notion that you can't do it. Again, I'm speaking to the converted here, given the show of hands, but you can't do it unless you're in a place like Silicon Valley. It's just not right. And there are some places where you're better off doing it there because the city advantaged you. Chattanooga, this company Freightways we backed, it's kind of like a Bloomberg data platform for the trucking industry. Right. Well, most of the big trucking companies are in Chattanooga, so that's actually the best place to be. Yep. Company in Northwest Arkansas, Fayetteville, called Acre Trader. The founder actually was in San Francisco and moved to Arkansas because Acre Trader is a platform to invest in farmland. He said, well, I'm going to build a platform to invest in farmland. I kind of need to be close to the farmers and build some trust and goodwill and so forth. And so that's what's happening that's different. It's not just about lower cost of operations, which is obviously an advantage. There's some strategic reasons to be in these cities, and that's what I tried to highlight in the book. There's like 30 cities that we profile. It's not one or two or three. This is the most common question. So, talk about San Francisco, New York, and Boston. What are the next one or two or three? And it's actually several dozen that are on the rise, including, I'm sure, many communities folks in this audience represent.
So the idea is tech is now the commodity, and it's the industry-specific expertise that then becomes a value added. So.
And you need partners in this next wave. It's not about dropping an app in the App Store and hoping it spreads virally and then figuring out some way to monetize it. If you want to revolutionize healthcare, the technology you build is important. We backed this company in Tempest, really in Chicago, really interesting technology. But then they partnered with the largest hospitals in the country, Mayo Clinic, MD Anderson, and so forth. So those partnerships become critically important. And the partnerships, you're likely to have an advantage if you're closer to those partners, understand their culture, understand some of the challenges they're dealing with.
Now, the pandemic, did it help or hurt the Rise of the Rest movement?
I hate to say it because it's obviously a tragedy in so many respects, but it was definitely helpful. It was sort of a tipping point, I think, in terms of people taking a step back, rethinking their lives. How do I want to work? Where do I want to live? How do I want to live? Remote work, hybrid work. Led to a dispersion of talent after years of a brain drain of people leaving different parts of the middle of the country to go to the coast. Started seeing sort of that reverse, a little bit of a boomerang. venture capitalists, because suddenly they're doing pitch meetings on Zoom. They said, well, I guess if I'm doing a pitch meeting on Zoom, it doesn't really matter if they're a mile away or 1,000 miles away. So that opened up some, and then people, when they went to these cities like Detroit, saying, wow, no idea there was so much going on here. So I think if you're looking for a silver lining in what has been a tragic, 30 months or so, I think it's the rise of rest is really accelerated, and I think that bodes well for the next decade.
A lot of the focus of the book, of course, is the rise of the rest geographically, but a lot of the amazing stats in here, sad stats, are 75% of the venture capital investments going to 3 states, but more than 90% are going to men, less than 10% to women, and 1% to black founders. So how do we make rise of the rest more than just geography, but demography?
No, it
too?
started, you're exactly right. The statistics are great. Women are 50% of the population, less than 10% of venture capital. Black Americans are 13% of the population, less than 1% of the venture capital. So if you just look at the data, it does matter where you live, and it does matter what you look like. If you have an idea whether you have a shot of building a company, kind of a real shot at the American dream. And so our efforts started around place, but quickly we started leaning into diversity. And I think now over 40% of the companies we've backed are either female founders or founders of color, which is still not what it should be, but a lot better than you see in other venture firms. Part of that is because many of the cities we visit are in and of themselves more diverse, so that helps, and partly because the intentionality of our team to, when we're coming to town, really reach out to a broad range of communities and make sure that the pitch competition reflects the diversity of the community that we're visiting.
Yeah, almost by definition, by finding those gems, you're generating alpha that way. We have a bunch of questions I see from the audience. One about a lot of the reason people traditionally moved to Silicon Valley was that critical mass for networking and that people coming together. So how do you replicate that in a rise of the rest?
Well, first of all, I want to be clear that I'm super excited about Silicon Valley. This is not an anti-Silicon Valley thing. It's more of a trying to support more people in more places. There's a lot of great things about Silicon Valley, including the network effects, that ecosystem of people, that sense of possibility. And you hear an idea in Silicon Valley, you say, well, here's why it might succeed. Many parts of the country, people focus too much on the risk factors, why it might fail. So there's a lot to be proud about with Silicon Valley. We just can't have a country where essentially everybody feels like they have to be in a certain place to participate in the innovation economy. And we can't have a country where a few places are rising, a lot of places are struggling, and people feeling left out and left behind. That's why we're focused on this. But we do, in each city we visit, and part of the reason we drive around on a bus, other than it's sort of Americana road trip kind of thing, is it's actually a rolling convening platform. We're bringing people together, including people from the outside to see what's happening, but also people living there to connect them. And we're always struck by people who should know each other and should work together aren't doing that. So part of it is driving that community, that collaboration at a local level, but then connecting people through what we built a Rise the Rest network, and we hold summits like you do, and with bringing investors together, bringing entrepreneurs together. So we're deliberately trying to figure out ways to learn from some of the aspects that are great about Silicon Valley and have them distributed more broadly all across the country.
We got another question about the education system. You talk in the book about the importance of kind of the education hubs too. Like how do we tailor that to encourage more entrepreneurship locally?
It's complicated. Obviously, K-12 we do need to reimagine. Some people are focusing on this, so we encourage more creativity. We encourage more kind of collaboration. We encourage more risk-taking. And then later, in terms of higher ed, how do these universities all around the country, not just on the coast, some of the best universities like Carnegie Mellon in Pittsburgh or Michigan and Ann Arbor and many other examples. These are terrific universities, terrific research universities, but often when people graduate, they feel like they have to leave there to go to someplace else. And so there we have to focus on strengthening the startup communities, creating more connectivity with the universities and the startups so that more people do stay. And the data there over the last few years has been encouraging. It's sort of more people, for example, graduating from Carnegie Mellon are staying in Pittsburgh than before 10, 15 years ago, but there's still some work to be done there.
We have a question, and I swear I didn't plant this, about startups in Africa and the idea of Rise of the Rest not just in America, but in regions that have tons of talent and not enough capital.
Absolutely. As part of this White House effort, I talked about Startup America. I did do there was a global entrepreneurship summit in Kenya and with President Obama. And
You're being invited to Kenya.
And we participated in that and then did some tours in different cities and did make some investments in both some companies in Africa and also some funds in Africa. But we, after coming back from that, we said, there are a lot of things that need to be done in Africa, but there's also a lot of things that need to be done right here in America. So that's why we decided to double down and focus Rise or Rest on helping the dozens of cities and dozens of states all rise up so they can participate in the innovation economy. And I do think, as I said before, at least in a small way, I think there might be a path, I hope, to knit together a very divided country by creating opportunity and closing what is a pretty stark opportunity gap.
No, when you're an entrepreneur, there's no such thing as red and blue. It's just,
And on this bus, I get briefed on, like the mayor, the governor, and so forth, what party they represent. But when we're talking about entrepreneurs, we're talking about innovation, we're talking about job creation, we're talking about economic growth. It is a nonpartisan issue. Even 10 years ago, I worked with the White House and Congress on passing the Jobs Act.
That's right.
Starting our business
so much
startups
easier
Act.
to
That had broad bipartisan
public.
support. So
That's
a lot
right.
of things divide us. This is a place that can unite us, and we need to seize this moment.
And I think that's true globally. I swear I did not plant that last question, but it's too good not to segue into that. We have a video that I think everyone here is really going to like. I think you'll like it too, Steve. So let's see if they have it ready.
The honor and the privilege to heartily welcome you to this exciting occasion of the first ever Forbes Under 30 Summit to be held in Africa.
The global business world has come to Africa.
The future of Africa is exciting, and the future is in this room.
Forbes 30 under 30, this is insane. Every single day when I wake up and I look in the mirror and I look around me, I still can't believe this is real.
Want us to leave with today is our determination and commitment to keep fostering an entrepreneurial mind for ourselves, so that when we leave this room, we continue to have this spirit of wanting to create, this spirit of wanting to solve problems, this spirit of wanting to play a part in building our continents and the global economy.
All right.
Great to see. Actually, my wife, Jean, who Randall knows, is the chair of the National Geographic Society, and the whole board was actually in Botswana
Oh, I love
10
that.
days ago. So
I love that. Well,
I'll-
we're coming back in April 2023. Who wants to go? You're all invited.
All right.
Oh, I see who is here from Botswana? Shout it out. All right, go
Oh,
find
they got
it.
the flag.
Anyway, we will be announcing how to sign up, but it was amazing last year, and we've committed to go back. We want it's truly, and I thought it would be a good time to talk about that and announce that. So that's a scoop, folks. We're going back to Botswana. It's a tremendous event, but it's really in the spirit, Steve, of what you're doing. There's so much potential. You go to, again, you've been there. You go to Africa. It's the same thing, just like being here in Detroit. There's so much great talent outside of the coast, outside of London, and it's invigorating. And so a lot of this is, inspired by, a lot of the stuff you've done. So I know we got lunch. By the way, if you want to meet Steve, we bought 100 books. Steve will sign one just like he signed one to me. I appreciate that.